So welcome to Creating Lesson Plans for Distance Learning. I'm Jewel Clark. I am the Integrated Curriculum Coordinator at the San Diego County Office of Education. And I work to support career readiness initiatives throughout our region. California has our own structure in education, as every state does. So in our region, we have about 500,000 students across 42 school districts and a number of charters. So I tend to work mostly with educators and with the leaders in each district and in support of providing high quality career technical education and career readiness programs to all of our students here in the region. And so if you're just joining us here, you'll see if you want to introduce yourself in the group chat and say hi, feel free at any time also to add questions in the chat or use the hand raise function, and then I can unmute you, or you can, I think I left it so you could unmute yourself at the moment. And you can feel free to ask any questions. I am going to start us off with this question: how are you feeling? And you should see a poll launching right now in your Zoom account. So if you wouldn't mind taking a moment, and if you look at this diagram, you'll see a lot of different kind of feelings that all funnel into these 6 categories. You're welcome to select more than one if you want to select up to 3 about where you're feeling right now. Just doing a quick check-in. I think one of the things that's nice about these is to hear from you, but also to model things that you can do with your students as you check in with them on a daily basis. Or not daily, right? You might only see them once or twice a week in a synchronous environment like this. So far, I'm excited that those of you who have responded to this poll are peaceful and happy. So I'll share the results here in a moment once we end the poll. But as we are jumping in to this webinar, I just wanted to take a moment and really think about, we're all coming from different places. And that's important not just for us to think about, but also our students, because they are also really overwhelmed at this time, whether it's from family life, home life, or having 6 different classes and their teachers having a lot of different expectations of them. All of that together is a little bit difficult for many students. So I'm going to go ahead and click End Poll. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to share results so that if you haven't done a poll before, you should see right now that actually most respondents said they're feeling very peaceful. So that's nice. Hopefully you had a nice little lunch and you're starting to get your stride in distance learning. And then we've got a little bit of scared, and I'll say if I was filling this out, that would be one of the ones that I click, just because if you look at the bigger wheel, there's also things around like confused or unsure and things like that. And I think that those are really common feelings right now for both teachers and students. So this was just a quick exercise to kick us off and get you thinking about how you might engage your students in that. For those of you who've joined us since we started, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. You're welcome to raise your hand at any time using the participants area to ask any questions. Again, I'm Jewel Clark with the San Diego County Office of Education, and we're going to talk a little bit now about creating lesson plans for distance learning in CTE. I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. So the first thing, and you'll kind of see one of the things that I found in giving webinars and things, when I go into presentation mode, it makes it a little bit hard to manage all of my components with Zoom or whatever interface. And also I'll be showing you a lot of different tabs. So at this point, I usually just leave it in non-presentation mode, and that actually helps me to navigate back and forth and also to go back and forth between tabs. So I'll just share with you my kind of behind the scenes way in case that helps you when you get into your classes and are working with them. So the California Department of Education has issued some guidance on distance learning. And so I like to kind of start out by thinking about the fact that this is a great mindset to have right now, but also as we go into the fall, because distance learning doesn't just look like students at home, teacher at home, and connecting. Sometimes it could be that students are coming in just for labs. There could also be packets, as we see for students who are in rural areas or don't have internet access, that we're getting them paper packets and things like that. But what we want to see, some of the highest level is this teacher interaction opportunities through an online learning platform. And so as you look at these different components, from top to bottom and thinking about what kinds of programs that we'll have going forward. This is just a broad overview of those ideas. And I did want to start out also thinking about, when we talk about distance learning, this idea of value. Because in CTE, we are uniquely placed because we have value. Right now, I will tell you that the #1 struggle with teachers that I talk to is engagement. They are seeing 30 to 50% of their students in class. And many of you are going through that same question. If grades aren't required or important, then why are students even going to show up? But the reality is that CTE provides a value beyond a grade. And so hopefully as you engage your students now and really think about the value of the work they're doing and help them see it's beyond the grade, then you'll get a lot more engagement along the way. And so let's jump in. And the first thing I want to talk about is the foundation, which is the scope of learning. And this is going to be set out by your district leadership or your site leadership or your charter leadership, whatever your organizational structure is. And so the first thing, when we kicked off this year, we had a lot of enrichment, which meant that it was not required instruction. And still in California, and I think in most states, we have a no hold harmless so that students aren't going to get a lower grade than they had on March 13th when we closed schools. And so, that helps to give foundational kind of parameters around what you're going to do with students. From there, you can also think about what technology there is, what has your district provided as far as tablets and Chromebooks and laptops, and what their capacity is, which I think we're all starting to learn. In CTE, we have so many high-end resources that we use, from Adobe in our AME pathways, our arts, media, entertainment pathways, to CAD software for engineering. And much of that does not work well on a Chromebook, if at all. And so thinking about the hardware and how that impacts the software is a really important piece of that kind of foundational planning. And then also just thinking about Zoom and Google Hangouts or whatever it is your district is recommending and what parameters your district has set helps you out with that. So I'm using Zoom, but I know that due to some safety concerns, a lot of districts have chosen not to use Zoom, or maybe they already had an adoption with Google. So obviously you're going to go with the adoptions that your district has provided for you. Most of the time too, they'll give you some guidance around how much time you should be spending. And just remember that because you're a secondary teacher, whatever you're giving students, they're also getting that from 5 other teachers for the most part, if you're in a 6 course program. And so if your student, they have their English, their math, their social science, and their CTE and another class. And so just think about whatever work you give, and if that was times 6, what that would feel like. Your district may also provide guidance. I know in some of our districts, they've said only 30 minutes a day worth of instruction for each class. So right now that'll be one thing, but as we go into the fall, I know in California, we have been told that we're sticking to the 300-hour requirement for pathway completers. And so we will need to be really mindful of how many hours of instruction and student activities are there, so that depending on how they collect that information, that we can still make sure our students are pathway completers. But for right now, follow your district guidance. And that really becomes the question when we get into that transformative work for the following year. Also, it's not just about your students in your district, it's about you. What's your capacity to do this work? How comfortable are you with all of these platforms and things like that? And so, don't push yourself so far that you are not able to engage with your students, or, we absolutely don't want you feeling sick or under the weather because of the work that you're putting in. I know most of us are working more than ever before. And someone asked about a copy of the presentation, and you can actually find that at our CTE distance site, but I will go ahead and share a quick link right now so that you can jump straight in. Thank you for that question along the way. All right. So as we go through these, it's really, so that's your foundational thing. Your district's going to give that to you. It may be part of your union negotiations if you're in a union. but there should be parameters that are issued on that. Now you get into your content and you really have to start and think about what are the big ideas. So the first one is, what are your priorities? Non-negotiable learning outcomes. Also remembering that there are some students who aren't going to engage at all. But if the students who are in your class had just this one learning outcome, what would it be in order for them to be really successful in the next course? For many of you, you teach the next course, so you'll know what gaps your students have in learning, or you can also talk to the teacher in the next course and see if there's anything specific that can help. A lot of times this is part of kind of the momentum you have in class, right? We have some classes who've already started projects, so perhaps that becomes the focus going forward, is just kind of taking that to completion. But thinking about those non-negotiable learning outcomes is an important component of your planning. Also considering the assets that students have at home. We already talked about the technology and the software, but they actually may have issued a textbook for your class, and sometimes we forget that that textbook's sitting at home collecting dust, so think about that. But also around the house, like, what does a student have access to? Some of the things that I've been hearing from teachers are, our fashion design teachers, some of them actually do have sewing machines at home, and so they're working from that. I would love to see some chopped style challenges for students, and the mystery box is your refrigerator, right? So the culinary programs could definitely use some of the assets at home in giving students some ideas on what they might make, or certain okay, well, we want to focus on this kind of knife cut this week. Make anything you want that, cuts a julienne. So those are some of the things that you could do, just thinking about what they have around the house. I know also some of our environmental pathways are talking about how you can take recyclable materials and reuse or repurpose them as well. So there's some things that you might find are way out of the box that are available now that you never had before. It's also really important to keep in mind the needs of all of your students. And so if you're looking, make sure that you have access to their IEP and their 504 plans, or whatever your specific plan is called in your state, for any special needs or accommodations. We know that not every accommodation can be met through distance learning. Things like having an aide one-on-one are significant challenges. But wherever you can accommodate students, you'll definitely want to be able to do that through distance learning. And that might just be extra time, or maybe, some of it could be easier. But if you have students who have visual difficulties, pre-record your lesson. If you use YouTube, it will actually add all of the subtitles to it so that those students can better engage with the information. So it's small things like that that may make things a lot easier for those students. The other piece is community building. CTE career pathways have historically been incredible communities for our students. It's an opportunity for students to connect with each other, to have kind of the same courses. If you're in an academy, they might be cohorted in multiple courses. And so they have a sense of belonging that's really different than many other programs on a school campus. This is a chance for you to engage with students and bring them in, and then you can sneak in learning afterwards. So really have these opportunities, bring your pet to school day and chair innovation challenges and things like that, that help your students really engage with each other, be excited to log in and see what the other students are bringing to the table. And that's going to help a lot with student engagement and belonging, and also just social emotional learning. We started today with a small exercise where you just kind of indicated where you were coming from and some of the feelings that you had. Those small things help students feel heard. It helps them to feel, just a little bit more like they're not just takers of information, but part of your community and what you're planning for. And so consider what you can do in those spaces as well. The other piece about building a community is that your students are natural leaders. Many of them have been involved in CTSOs or have done other really interesting work. And so having them actually engage either as a class or as individuals in searching out and saying like, hey, here's a project I want to work on, or I'm suggesting like, here's a cool thing what we could do as a group. Let your students help you out. They may also be able to help you find resources. If you're struggling to find an alternative to maybe a program you usually use in the classroom, give your students a chance to do that research for you, you know, or try different things. So a lot of people are struggling with the use of some of the Adobe Suite products because Chromebooks don't work well with them. And so you might say like, you can use anything you want, and here are a few suggestions. And you could say like Canva or Visme or whatever other programs that you've seen, and let the students try the different pieces out or seek out something new for themselves and see what happens. Right now is a time you can be creative. If you've ever had a project where you're like, how would I ever grade that? Now's the time to do it, because grades don't really matter. And so feel that freedom, be excited. And at the end of the day, don't give busy work. Go back to that, what we talked about earlier, the value of the work that they're doing and how that can apply. Even I've heard some of our local schools are working on some projects related to COVID-19, whether it is educating others. And so like create like a hand washing infographic that someone could put up in a bathroom, or create, one of our schools is reaching out to local businesses and working with some of those mom and pop restaurants on how to advertise better, so that locals know more of what is in the community and available, and they're utilizing some of their school blasts to highlight local companies that are still open, and the students are creating those materials for them. So it almost becomes like a mini internship where students are working on real world problems and really addressing community needs in a time of a pandemic. There's not much more real world than you can get. And so think about your own community and your school situation to see if that might be a fit for you. All right, as you're thinking about all of these things, next, just go through every resource, not every resource, because we know there's a million resources out there. Just start filtering through the resources and make a list of activities, videos, infographics, articles, simulations, whatever you can find that connect to that learning outcome, right? So you came up with this non-negotiable learning outcome. Now you're going to go ahead and like come up with a whole bunch of things that students might do to meet that learning outcome. And that's when you start evaluating, all right, what isn't already made on the internet? Because there's a lot of stuff out there already. Don't feel like you have to make all of this for yourself. You might find things on YouTube, Khan Academy, or a lot of unions and trade organizations have materials for training that you might be able to use for your students. So once you get that big pile of things, that's where you're looking for gaps. And that's where you say like, what's not easily available online? And that's where you're gonna spend your time creating new content. You might not need to make hardly anything new. It all might be out there for you. So don't put everything on your own shoulders. Just really think about all of these resources. I'm going to jump over, and before I move on, and we're going to get into kind of how to construct this into a bigger lesson plan here in a minute. Are there any questions from the group? Feel free to raise your hand or ask in the chat. But let me just take a moment here and just see if there's anyone who has a question along the way. All right, I will take your silence as a reason to move on, but please don't hesitate. During any time, you can use the little hand raise function, and then I'll know that you have a question, or you can type it in the chat area. All right, so if you haven't been on CTE Online before, I wanted to give you a quick tour, and I'll also jump in and show you some of the things that are happening to provide distance learning resources. So CTE Online is funded by the California Department of Education, and it is not an online learning platform, even though it kind of sounds like it from the name. It's really a repository of online resources for CTE learning. Most of these are actually created every year. There are these great events where teachers come together and they co-construct lesson plans that are highly rigorous and meet the CTE Online requirements. And so those are all posted in this repository. And someone did ask if the recording will be made available. Yes, as I said at the beginning, I'm recording. So just so you know, if you do ask a question, it will be part of the recording. And I will make this available. It will likely be on the distance learning website later today. And so you can find that at the CTE distance that is on most of the pages here. So I also posted that in the group chat. That's my CTE distance learning resources curated site from the San Diego County Office of Education. So, so CTE Online, again, it's free. And so even if you're not in California, this is a free resource. There's no check mark that says you have to be a California teacher to utilize it. But what you'll find, you do have to have an account, and then you will get a nice little opening that doesn't have my face on it, but it will have yours instead. And if you go to CTE Distance Learning Resources, what our team is doing, and I'm part of the bigger team for California and distance learning and CTE, is there's someone assigned to each one of these sectors separately to help curate the materials. So let's go ahead and pick arts, media, and entertainment. And what you'll find is projects from CTE Online that are more easily adjustable for distance learning. You'll find resources that are curated that will specifically meet the needs of that sector. Additionally, some lesson plans are being uploaded in order to help align to this. And then also what you'll find is collections, and in these collections, you'll find more general resources for CTE distance learning. So I'm just gonna go ahead and click on one of these so that you understand kind of the structure. In a project for CTE Online, you'll see kind of like some little shapes that are overlaid over a background picture. So sometimes it looks a little crazy. But each one of these little shapes is actually a full lesson plan. So if I click on one of these lesson plans, you'll see this particular one is 1 to 3 class periods, more or less. And what you can do is you can just pluck from this anything that you want. So it'll give you the standards and things that it's hitting, and then it'll go through the activities. The nice thing is that the resources are embedded here. So if you can take this link and put it straight into your LMS, you can, you don't want to send students into CTE Online because they would need an account, and that gets very messy. But here, as you go through, there are all these different activities. The PowerPoint's already done for you. Here's a video clip that's already pre-selected for you. Some notes forms and an answer sheet to go with that. Another reason not to send students in here, because the answers might be a little easy to get. And so this is a really nice way for you to find resources that are already digital that you can download and utilize in your learning management system. So this particular project is made out of 4 lessons, which may take, a day to a week, depending on the lesson. And so it's really easy. You can have your students create their logo, their business card, and their letterhead all as part of this design project that's already posted here. And so I encourage you, if you haven't been at CTE Online, take some time to search around. The other thing that is a really amazing resource in CTE Online is actually the groups. There's a group for each of the 15 industry sectors that are aligned with California's industry sectors. So what you'll see is if I go into one of these industry sectors and click, here is a group, and you can just be a group member, and what you'll do is they'll post some different things as they come up. So there's some information on FFA week that's going on. And so as you go through, some of these comments are a little bit older, but you can post a comment to the group anytime. And this is just another place to engage in a community around CTE. I think one of the things that's a struggle for CTE is that it's like, all right, well, you have science, you have math, you have CTE, but CTE is 15 completely separate sectors. And even within those, the pathways are vastly different. And so it is a very difficult thing to support so many different industries simultaneously. So CTE Online does a really nice job of building those communities and having opportunities in there. All right, so I wanted to get into any, feel free again, any questions. And as I mentioned before, yes, a recording will be available afterwards, and I will post that on the CTE Distance site. All right, so we already talked, whoops, we are back here. We should be here. So we talked last time we were in the slides a few minutes ago about this idea of coming up with these resources create aligned to your outcome, right? So you have, all right, my outcome is this. Here's a bunch of learning resources that could be used for that, right? This is just a brainstorm. Now what you want to do is take all those and organize them into what I'm calling a learning playlist. All right, so this week, here's your playlist. You can have everything kind of required and they're going to listen to that album and it's all going to be in a row. Or you could have opportunities to push shuffle or pick this or that or the other one. And so as you're thinking about what learning looks like for students, you can be really creative and anywhere possible, you can give choice to your students as well. The important thing though is to be clear. You can't just give them a list of things to do and then they don't know what they're going to turn in or when it'll be due. You really want to be specific. What does accountability look like? And also, how do you develop a routine? So in a minute, we'll look at kind of a sample weekly schedule that you could utilize and think about as you're planning. And then finally, assessing learning looks really different, particularly right now where there may not be grades. Perhaps the only students who are turning things in are the kids who had a failing grade or a D and are really looking to get that passing grade. And so for those students, it's really important that you are clear on what the grade will be, how it will be assessed, how it goes into the grade book, and how it will affect their ability to pass the class. So as you organize them, also think about these routines, right? Synchronous learning, that's what we're doing right now. We're all together in one big Zoom, and you're able to hear me live. You can ask questions and things like that. A little bit of that is good, but a lot is really difficult and stressful, particularly when students may have like limited bandwidth. So sometimes their internet's better than others. Let's say they only have a couple of devices in the family and they're all sharing. It's really hard to be online at this exact moment. And also what you'll find is our students are opening the door to very creative schedules to where you might get things turned in at 3 in the morning because they're still awake, but they'd like to sleep in until 11 a.m. And so, you know, in order to best engage students, consider, you know, that they are probably going to be sleeping in, and that it's okay for them to turn something in at 3 in the morning if that's the time they're feeling most productive and the internet works the best for them and they have access to a computer. So, you know, these are some of the things to remember. Giving students time to work on projects, think about foundational concepts. So as you look here, there are a lot of different things that might be part of that weekly routine. Portfolio building is actually a really interesting opportunity because it lives on beyond the grade so significantly. So if you already have portfolios at your school, this is a perfect chance for students to each pose their own portfolio project ideas, and then you just check in with them as they develop those along the way. And then you have, you know, you may have message boards where students go in and do that. Some could be things like Flipgrid. If you haven't used Flipgrid, it is a phenomenal opportunity to like leverage students' love of creating videos because you pose a little video question or a typed question, and then your students respond using mini videos, and you set the parameter from like 30 seconds to 4 minutes. And so they're gonna use that tech tool, but then they can post at any time. You might be aware that our students are really into TikTok right now, which is a platform for really short videos. And so they are creating videos. I will tell you that. If you can get them to push some of that creative energy towards your learning outcome in class by creating, you know, a Flipgrid, and you say like, hey, it's kind of like TikTok. Don't you want to make a video? They get to see each other's videos. It's a really fun way to engage students. Also, when you select the class version of Flipgrid, you get to approve each video before it goes public to the rest of the class, and it's cordoned off from other people. So for video and questions, Flipgrid is definitely a big one. Kahoot and Pear Deck also are really great technology integrations. And I will say, actually, let me go show you. Our county office has done a really incredible job, and I'll put this link in here, of getting into distance learning tools for all teachers. So if you go to the learning material, distance learning, and educators, one of the things that you'll see down here is like things like Zoom or free online learning tools, and it'll go through like, okay, I want to learn about Kahoot. And so if you click on Kahoot, it'll just kind of bring you to a lot of these different pieces of free links. And not just the links are free, but let's see, what you'll see at the bottom here, we actually have an archive of webinars on like 1,000 different tech tools. Not 1,000, that's probably a little hyperbolistic, but I'll put that direct link also in the chat. But basically for the first few weeks of the shutdown, our organization hosted a number of digital Zoom webinars. And so you can actually go through and see all of webinars based on all of these different topics. So you can click on a different vendor and see what kinds of resources that they had, as well as just a number of specific webinars that we've put on. And so that might be a great resource for those of you who are just looking to figure it out and you're like, okay, I've heard about Kahoot, but like, what happens next? There are definitely resources out there to support your understanding of those. All right. Also, don't overwhelm you or your students with too many. Only introduce one new tech tool a week at the most, right? So maybe the first week you just use Flipgrid, and then you're trying to figure out your learning management system and Zoom and all these other things. The next week, don't say like, today we're gonna do a Kahoot, and tomorrow we're doing a Padlet, and then the next day we're doing a Pear Deck. That's really overwhelming. Even if you're really tech savvy, you have some students who are gonna struggle with some of these. So just think about only introducing one new tool a week just to help you be more sane as well as keep your students engaged. All right, so as we get into this week, here's kind of an example weekly routine. Maybe you start out on Monday, you're gonna host a virtual class, you're gonna talk about, all right, this week's learning objective is A, B, or C. Let's all check in, let's see your pets. You know, what's some crazy hat, you know, share what your favorite hat is, or, you know, something silly that gets students wanting to log in and see each other. On another note though, if a student doesn't want to turn on their screen, remember that they don't have the beauty of having a digital background because that requires a higher end computer usually. They might not be comfortable inviting their whole class into their home. And so don't feel too overwhelmed if they all have their videos off, they're in their pajamas, their siblings are running around, maybe it's, you know, something that they feel uncomfortable sharing their home. So like that has to be okay, just like it's okay with us to not always have to be on video. A lot of kids are really sensitive too. Right now you are all looking straight at me and I've been doing this for weeks. And so, you know, I don't mind at all. But some students are really sensitive because all of a sudden, instead of everyone staring at the teacher and a kid in the back answers a question, when that kid answers a question now, all eyes are on them. And so it can be really anxiety inducing for students. And so give them the freedom not to turn on the video if they are not comfortable. But think about this. So Monday, virtual class, introduce. If you're not doing a virtual class, you could do an introductory little video or vignette or some kind of thing that kicks off the week. Maybe Tuesday, students are digging into things on their own, maybe a digital assignment. You could assign a Flipgrid. You could work on a project, an online activity. And any day that you don't have kind of an active place for students, you might consider office hours. Office hours don't have to be like you sitting alive in a Zoom, but they can also just be, hey, this is my office hours, send me an email and I'll meet you in Zoom, or send me an email and I'll be able to get back to you within 20 minutes if you email me during this window, so that you're extra alert during that time and are available. You could also do a phone call if you're comfortable giving out your phone number. If you're not comfortable giving out your phone number, my trick has always been to actually, Google has their own phone number system and you can get a Google phone number for free. And so like in the past when I did field trips and I wanted to give out a phone number where students could contact me on my cell phone, but I didn't want them to get my personal cell phone number, I just used Google Voice, and I had a Google Voice number. They could call it, they could text it. I could call from that number, and then that helps me keep my own phone number private. It's also something you can turn off using Google, so that like during certain hours it's not active, or when, you know, when this is all over and you don't want to use it anymore, you can just turn it off. So maybe on Wednesday, so Monday you did the intro, Tuesday students are doing their thing. Wednesday, let's engage together in some way. Doesn't have to be at the same time, but do this message board. Maybe have a Padlet, which is kind of like a sticky note board for students. Have some kind of interactive, collaborative activity. Perhaps on Thursday, students are going to do an activity, a simulation, something like that. Maybe they're going to create an infographic or a video, and that would be another opportunity. You could host office hours. And then on Friday, maybe it's project work time. Maybe it's a deadline day. You could also host office hours anytime there's a deadline so that students can ask you questions. It's nice to post your expectations for the following week, the week before if possible, so that would be helpful. It's also a great thing if you have special needs students or students who are struggling, you can schedule, whether it's on Fridays or like maybe every day, you schedule at least one connection with a student just to check in and see how they're doing. So all of this said, there is actually a distance learning adaptation template that has been developed by the team at the California Department of Education. And this is something that you can freely use. Sorry, I opened in the wrong account. And so I'll go ahead and put the direct link to that also in the chat. But if you are in this presentation, you should be able to click on all of these yourself as well. But the distance learning adaptation template has actually a number of strategies that are both synchronous or asynchronous that you might use. And the cool thing is right here, there's links to so many of these. So if you're thinking about a learning management system, you probably have one figured out by now that was provided by your district. But like if you're trying to do some kind of discussion, things like Padlet or Flipgrid, Kialo are all helpful, or you can do things like freeconferencecall.com. And so these tools are linked right here in this template. As we scroll down, there's also some guidance for teachers, right? Your opening activity, what are the strategies? How do you want to vary that and go through? And then the final piece is actually something that you could fill out and you could just upload into your learning management system or send out to your students to say, here's what you're doing for the week. So if you want to use this, just make a copy and then you can just fill it out every week as you go. So the first week it might be, here's lesson objectives, your questions, and then deliverables and due dates, which is really important because the first thing a kid's going to ask is like, what do you want me to do with this? And so this is a really helpful way. So then you say, okay, what's my hook? What am I going to do on Monday? How am I going to start us off? And so you might put that information here. And then what are you going to do for guided practice that week? So maybe you're leading them through, just like right now. This is actually direct instruction that I'm providing for you. So not exactly ideal for our students. But as we go through, you might have a way for you, just like how I have my computer open and I'm sharing my screen, you can have your computer open and you can share your screen and you can work on things, but you can also have students share their screen back to you. You can break students up into smaller groups in the working breakout rooms as they work through things. You can also you want to make sure you're checking for understanding. That's those things like how I said on Wednesday, maybe you have a message board, like that checks, like, are students getting it? Are they way off base? And you say like, hey, based on your answers in the message board, here's a video you should all watch that explains this concept in more detail. You don't want to wait until everything's due at the end of the week to figure out that they don't know what's going on. But we know that's the case in the regular classroom as well. Any closing or extension activities, and then additional resources. The numbers in here are just so that you have a structure. Clearly, you don't need exactly 5 or 3 on any of these. This is really just to give you a little bit of guidance and ideas on where to do. So this resource is something that we're really encouraging teachers to consider using if you don't already have a lesson plan template that your district is asking you to use. And even like, I'm not a box filler in general. I like to wing things pretty often. And so just even using this to outline your class might be helpful, even if you're not filling in all the boxes. Additionally, these kinds of strategies and variability and accessibility tips to go with each one of these pieces are something that's really great to use as a resource and a reference. I said Monday through Friday, but also remember, if every teacher is having everything due on Fridays, here we are in panic mode again, because I'm a kid who doesn't have to turn anything in, so I just won't. So depending on what your school is and things like that, consider like maybe your week goes from Wednesday to Tuesday, or from Thursday to Wednesday, or something like that, so that students have a little bit of a shift in when things are due. And so as we go through, someone had a question for more ideas for formative assessment. And just so that we are also thinking really specifically, formative assessment is just knowing where a student is at any given point. So even checking in with them is formative, but having some of these tech tools in use is really helpful, because then you can hear and see what they're doing. Even like if you're using Zoom, you can use the poll function and you can ask questions and you get an immediate response from all of your students. If you haven't used Pear Deck, it's really interesting because it is a Chrome extension that layers over your Google presentation. It may work in other presentations, but I've only used it with a Google Slides. And what you can do is, as your students follow along, they actually answer questions and they can like drag an answer over as you go. And they actually log in on their phone or other device to the Pear Deck, and you wouldn't really need Zoom the same way. You could actually just do vocal and use Pear Deck. That's really interesting to think about. But then students are kind of answering along the way. So, and there may be additional resources specific to those assessments, but I know that is a place that there are some task forces working on what that assessment can look like. And so as more comes out, perhaps that becomes a future webinar topic. So if you have ideas like assessment or whatever works for you or whatever you're looking for, please suggest future topics. Next week, I will be doing another webinar on career ready strategies. So this is more specifically to lesson planning, but there are a lot of really cool things that you can do. I think career readiness and career exploration are kind of the easy way to do CTE work right now. All right, one thing to remember is accessibility. Basically for these slides, I took the language straight from the California Department of Education. When you talk about accessibility and you are providing those, you want to always take direction from your LEA, your district, your charter, your site, from your administrators as to how you can best ensure accessibility for your students. But thinking about how you create, how big it is, you'll see right now, I've really tried to have limited empty space, but sometimes people will do, they'll take something like this, but maybe you're at like 75%. So if you've been in any talks and like, this is what it looks like, and you're like, I can barely see it because you're not controlling that, just really think about, okay, how do I fill my screen if I'm sharing it? So I'll be very careful to try to make it at a higher percent so that people who are sharing the screen can actually read it. Those are simple things that we can do in order to improve accessibility for our students, just thinking about those font sizes and things. Every image that you put on a website, there's a way to put in what's called alt text that describes the image. So if someone's going through with a screen reader, the screen reader can say like, hey, this is an image of, the San Diego County Office of Education with a flag flying above, whatever the picture is. So that's also helpful. So these are just a number of tools for that. If you are creating video, like I said, if you upload it into YouTube, YouTube automatically will create the, it's not exactly the best closed captioning because it doesn't have capitalization and punctuation. But what I'll do after this is I'll upload this into YouTube. YouTube will do all my transcribing for me, and then I can post it, and that makes it much more accessible for people. And that's all done automatically with a free account. So when we think about resources, The CTE Online we went through. University of California Curriculum Integration is a project that is around integrated curriculum, and there are a lot of digital resources in there that you might be interested in. But I did want to take a moment to show you this resource, which I've been working with our local CTE teachers. This is actually what is crowdsourced, so anyone can go in and anyone can edit this, which is its own interesting risk. But this is a place for you to seek out things by sector. So let me, as it loads, I will be able to share this link with you. It's loading a little slow, possibly because I'm zooming yet again. All right, let me just copy the old-fashioned one, maybe. All right, so this is our CTE sector specific resources. At the top, I have some generic resources. Many of you probably found out about this from the Distance Learning Weekly publication I'm working on with the California Department of Education. So you can see our last two publications, and our next one will come out tomorrow. And here's just some additional resources. But when you get down here, what you can do is for any given sector, it links down. At this point, we have about 40 pages of resources across sectors. And so if I go to engineering and architecture here, what you'll see is some of the activities we talked about in one of our meetings with that sector, and then resources that are suggested in that sector. And so this is a great way for you when you're doing that, like, okay, big brainstorm dump of like, okay, what might help right now? This is a resource where I have pulled in resources that everything that gets emailed to me every time I'm working with teachers and they suggest something, and then it's also editable by anyone. And so if you have resources to suggest, I would love for you to add them also to some of these. So the organization is funky and not all the information is in every column, but there's a ton of information here, like I said, across sectors. So what you can do is find the sector that most closely matches. I know different states have different titles for their industry sectors, but whichever one most closely matches you, that might be another place for you to find resources by sector. I didn't want to just end and say like, all right, it's all gonna be great. And just do these things and it'll be magically perfect. Because right now, like I said, we are in what we call triage mode with education, slap some Band-Aids, encourage kids to come in. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, we'll see. But when we look at the fall, what we're gonna be doing is transformation. We're gonna transform education. It's gonna look different, all right? So we have a lot of planning considerations. First of all, nobody knows what it's gonna look like. No one's keeping any secrets from you, I promise. They just don't have the answers. The best thing that we can do is understand the potential scenarios and think about how we address them. So remember, if there are cycles of COVID-19 in your community, school might close for a while. Students, one of the models they're looking at is in order to reduce classroom crowding is having students on campus only 1 or 2 days a week so that they're kind of there in shifts and there are fewer kids in any given class. And so you may see models where fewer students are on campus and you have some students who are learning from home and some who are in class on any given day. And also remember, like if one of your students gets sick now, they might be out for 2 days. Next year, if they get sick, they're probably out until they either have a clear COVID-19 test or they have been well for 2 weeks. Not only does that apply to students, but it applies to us too. And so you could get a fever and they're not gonna have you back on the campus for 2 weeks. What are you gonna do? So it's really helpful to actually think about building your class for next year in Canvas, in Google Classroom, in whatever your learning management system is. And then whether they're in class or at home, they're kind of working through the same progression. That you have the same playlist, it's just some of those activities will be done in person on the days they're in class, and some might be done from home on the days they're not in class. And then also students who are ill or out for any given time can more easily keep up with class and then just need to do the hands-on pieces once they're back on campus. So think about that, building classes in your LMS. Think about what kinds of kits or equipment you might need for the fall. You may be able to get donations, you may be able to do a donor's choose, or it's possible that your district has some excess funds right now because you didn't go on that field trip and they were gonna drop, you know, $1,000 on that between your sub and your bus. Right now, many of our local school districts have passed our spending deadline, so they may not be able to do that. But having an idea of what they want means that July 1st, they might be able to put in those orders. So think about what kinds of kit or equipment checkouts would make life really a lot easier for you if you had access to those in the fall. And the other thing is work smarter, not harder. Find other people who teach what you teach, work together with them, and think about how you can leverage that expertise across all of your groups. So I know for our region this summer, I'm hoping to put together some opportunities for teachers to co-construct online resources and outlines for courses. And so, you know, anywhere that you see that happening, or once those are developed and we share them, please feel free to take a look at that. So as we get to the last page, I've launched a poll for feedback, which this is my first time doing that. I thought it would be fun to hear. You can select as many as are helpful to you, so you can kind of go through and let me know how this went for you and if it was helpful and things like that. All of my contact information is here on this final slide. And at this time, I will open up, we have a little less than 10 minutes for questions, comments, or also if you have any ideas and you want to add to the group knowledge, like please tell us what's working for you. So with that, I will open up the floor if anyone has any questions. You're a quiet group. But overall, people did find this to be helpful, according to the feedback that's coming in. So as you think about your class and where you can use support, remember, reach out to the people in your region, to other colleagues, engage in things like this, whether it's this webinar or another one, and keep doing all the amazing things that you're doing for CTE and for your students. And if you have any specific questions, that's right. So someone asked about students opening a CTE online account. So those accounts are for teachers to access resources and then download them, and then you would want to put them into your learning management system, because there's nowhere for students to actually do anything in CTE online. It would just have resources that are available to download. So it's best if you download them and put them into your learning management system. Many of them do have like the answer keys and things like that. So if students are in there, then like that kind of throws off the reason to do that work. But otherwise, yeah, that's a great way. It's just download them and then you can use them as you'd like. It's like an open educational resource, so you're welcome to use them. There's no limitations on using those resources. The work was funded by the California Department of Education, so it's not like teachers pay teachers. You can just take them, reuse them, change them, do whatever you want with them. So, all right, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing your afternoon, or this hour of this afternoon, with us. Hopefully, if you have any questions, you can see my email right here. Feel free to reach out, and otherwise, have a fantastic rest of your week. You've almost made it through Wednesday, and so best of luck to you and your students, and keep on doing the good work. You are all amazing, and the work that you do is just incredible at this time. So, thank you all.